Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating figure, Barbatos. But listen, we aren't just looking at him as some dry, historical, occult, ritual figure. No, we're unpacking Barbatos as this incredibly rich, deeply atmospheric character archetype, specifically tailored for dark fantasy world building. If you're a storyteller, a world builder, or just a massive fan of deep lore, this is absolutely going to change how you think about the wilderness in your stories.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the Duke of Beasts, the forest after the fire, ignored voices, omens and world building, true royal humility, and finally, we'll wrap up with some really cool narrative story hooks. Let's start with part 1, the Duke of Beasts' origins and the traditional profile. Looking at the traditional Ars Goetia profile, Barbatos is established right off the bat as the 8th spirit. He's a great duke commanding a staggering 30 legions. But what's really interesting here is that unlike a lot of early spirits who are described as these sharply monstrous, terrifying beasts, he's introduced through a scene of true regal authority. He appears with noble kings, companies, troops, the whole shebang. Traditionally, he's connected to the sun in Sagittarius, which gives him this almost centaur-like vibe, right? He's a wanderer, an archer, a forest lord, attended by an invisible court, and crucially, he uniquely understands the voices of animals. Moving right along to part 2, Forest After the Fire, the metaphorical transition. Now, in the traditional catalogue, Barbatos directly follows the 7th spirit, Amon, and the contrast here is absolutely crucial. While Amon represents this fiery, loud intensity of accusation, literally burning friendships down to the brutal truth, Barbatos is, well, he's the quiet forest after the fire. He is what happens when the screaming finally stops. He patiently hunts for and listens to what remains after the argument. And in his domain, the lost paths of broken friendships slowly begin to reappear. It's honestly this beautiful, melancholic transition from fiery conflict to patient recovery. Which brings us to part 3, Voices That Humans Ignore, the archetype breakdown. So how exactly does all of this translate into a dark fantasy archetype? We are essentially looking at a dark huntsman, a beast whisperer, and a reconciler of exiles. Let's weigh his strengths against the unique narrative dangers he brings to the table. I really want you to notice his primary narrative danger here. Barbatos has the power to reconcile friends and rulers, sure, but his method of reconciliation might actually involve uncovering the exact betrayal, the secret guilt that ruined the friendship in the very first place. So it's reconciliation, yes, but it is forced through this absolute crucible of uncomfortable truth. What this means is that Barbatos represents knowledge existing entirely outside of official human records. Human kings, they rely on written documents, treaties, and indoor royal courts. Barbatos, he doesn't care about any of that. He never answers from a throne indoors. Instead, he's the silent observer operating at the edge of the forest right at dawn. He listens to the evidence left by the wilderness itself as a witness. We're talking claw marks on a tree, the migration patterns of birds, paw prints in the mud, or how animals behave right before a storm hits. He hears exactly what the wilderness knows, which is usually exactly what arrogant humans are desperately trying to ignore.
Let's look at part 4, Omens and Borderland World Building.
First up, we have his followers. If you're building a world inspired by this archetype, a cult of Barbatos wouldn't be meeting in some polished traditional temple. No way. His followers would be a gritty, decentralized network. We're talking hunters, trackers, animal handlers, exiled nobles, maybe even grave robbers. And what unites them all is this fundamental belief that animals remember what men deny. They use these silent wilderness omens to secretly solve or sometimes expose deep political disputes. These are the outcasts, the folks navigating the borderlands, the ruined watchtowers, and the battlefields long reclaimed by grass.
And let me tell you, a kingdom touched by his influence is profoundly unsettling. Just imagine the supernatural horror here. It's not loud or full of bloody violence. It's an atmosphere that is just thick with omens. Picture a raven landing on an ancient treaty stone in the pouring rain, and when it opens its beak, it speaks in the exact voice of a brother who died in a forgotten war. It's dogs howling their buried evidence, or horses flat out refusing to walk down a road where a past betrayal happened. The real dread comes from that creeping realization that the forest has been watching and recording your darkest royal secrets the entire time.
Section 5. Demanding true royal humility.
You just picture this scenario for a second. A proud prince comes and asks Barbatos for reconciliation with a bitter rebel commander. Well, the demand in return is humiliating. Barbatos demands the prince strip away his royal garments, walk barefoot through the freezing forest, and truly listen to the voices of every single beast he has ever hunted for sport. As a morally ambiguous guide, Barbatos essentially forces arrogant rulers to listen downward, to actually pay attention to the servants, the graves, and the beasts they always considered completely beneath them, because for him, that is the only way they earn their redemption.
Finally, Part 6. Narrative hooks for storytellers.
Take our first hook here, the hound that testified. Imagine a lord is murdered, and the assassins are completely convinced they left no witnesses. But they ignored the old hunting dog. And then the dog begins leading investigators out into the family forest, digging until it uncovers buried letters that reveal a massive family conspiracy. It's a perfect example of using an animal omen to uncover hidden secrets and past crimes that human pride tried its absolute best to cover up.
Next up, we have the treasure under the treaty. Now, remember, Barbatos reveals hidden treasure, but that isn't always gold. In this scenario, two rival kingdoms are racing to find a mythical chest buried right on their border. But when they finally open it, it's not wealth. It's the original peace agreement, and it proves both of these warring monarchs are actually heirs to the exact same betrayed bloodline. That kind of truth absolutely shatters the pride of both kings, forcing a really painful reconciliation. Hook number 3 is birdsong at the execution. On the morning an innocent person is set to be hanged for treason, every single bird in the capital city starts singing the name of the real conspirator. Just think about the beautiful, quiet dread of a scene like that. Nature itself is stepping in to halt an unjust human-made official record. And it's terrifying for the guilty party, right? Because there is literally no one you can arrest or silence to make it stop.
And finally, the lost friend road. A merchant on a long journey follows a strange stag down a ruined, overgrown path. At the end of it, he finds the childhood friend he abandoned years ago, who is now mysteriously guarding a treasure neither of them even remembers burying. This touches brilliantly on Barbatos's power over both physical tracking in the wilderness and that deeply painful emotional reconciliation of lost friendships. If you are trying to visualize these scenes, you really want to lean into an aesthetic that is ancient and patient. We're talking deep forest greens, antique golds, raven blacks, and cold mist grays. The lighting should always be that striking dawn light piercing through the trees. For textures, think moss, wet bark, old leather, feathers, polished horn. The danger he brings isn't explosive, it's elegant, it's secretive, and it's quietly threatening.
So if you take absolutely nothing else away from this explainer today, let it be this one core symbol. The wilderness speaks where human pride has gone silent. Barbatos represents all of those uncomfortable truths we try so hard to bury in the dirt. He's the silent observer, the ultimate reminder that the earth is always watching. And ultimately, he demands absolute humility before he will ever help you find what you've lost.
I want to leave you with a little something to think about as we wrap up. Look at your own characters, the kingdoms in your own stories, and ask yourself, if the wilderness spoke the absolute truth about your past, what would it say?